What's the scariest fact you know in your profession that no one else outside of it knows? Story 1. As a librarian, you'd be horrified how many books we get returned and have to throw out because they're absolutely covered in bed bugs. We put a block on accounts and notify patrons, but I'm specifically told not to mention this problem to the public whatsoever by management. Story 2. Climbing into an unventilated manhole can kill you in seconds and you wouldn't even know anything was seriously wrong. You think that's air you're breathing now? Manholes can fill with gases that are heavier than breathable air. You think are breathing normally, but instead you fall unconscious and suffocate from lack of oxygen. Story 3. I'm a mailman, and sometimes people's houses just creep me out. Sometimes you walk up to a really rundown place with their mailbox hanging sideways, and you just get a bad feeling like bad things happen here. It's also creepy how bad some people's houses smell, and I can smell that shit from outside. If you're a hoarder with 20 cats, I can smell all the cat piss and sweet rotting smell as soon as I go up your walkway. Also, delivering mail to sketchy businesses that are clearly fronts for something else is never really fun, can make you pretty uneasy. Story 4. The laxity in healthcare facilities. The staff is under such stress, here in Canada anyways, that a lot of corners are cut to try and save time. But it eventually always comes back to bite you in the ass. Hygiene protocols not respected. Patients left in their filth because you have one nurse for 40 people with alarms going off everywhere. Sterilization processes not being followed as they should, increasing the risk of nosocomial disease. The list can go on. I remember starting to work and being all happy about helping people. And in the long run, you have to adapt to the place because if you try to follow the norms, you will quickly get reprimanded by wasting time/resources or whatever by your superiors. The longer I work by helping, the more bitter I become. You're basically fighting a battle that cannot be won, no matter the effort you put in. It is sad, because at the end of the day, the patient will be the one to suffer. Not saying all employees do their work correctly. Hell no. I see plenty of lazy-ass people, but the system rewards those people the same as the one breaking his balls off trying to fix it. The longer I try to do good, the more cynical I am becoming in this society. Story 5. Working in the sleep world, many people go to bed every night with untreated, undiagnosed sleep apnea. It's not entirely uncommon to see people's oxygen levels dropping to the mid-70s every night, and this is part of their normal routine. Incredibly dangerous, and awareness should increase further. Story 6. When you go to trial, the truth doesn't matter one lick. It's only what the evidence can show. So many clients struggle with this concept. In a criminal case, if you go to trial and lose, you will most likely get a harsher sentence than you think. Elected judges believe they have to appear tough on crime and hope that threat will convince you to take a plea deal so they have fewer cases on their trial docket. Story 7. I used to work in child protection. The people most likely to harm your child or you are people you already know, most likely family members. You can bar the door against bad men lurking in dark alleys, but when you do, remember who you're locking in with you. Story 8. At the large national insurance company I work for, and I'm assuming to some extent probably every national insurance company, everyone's homeowners policies that are being renewed are at minimum increasing 40%, but it would be more accurate to expect your homeowner's insurance to increase 55% or more the next time you renew. The 40% guy was a 2-year-old customer and had an excellent credit score with no other history of claims. Story 9. This might not be creepy, but it's definitely unsettling. I used to work in the travel industry, and you'd be surprised by how many people end up seriously hurt or even die while on vacation. When people travel, they often feel like nothing can go wrong. But here's the thing, you're not invincible. Always get travel insurance. Story 10. I work in a shelter. Some of our guests are from middle and upper class backgrounds. Bad choices, bad health, bad treatment, and bad luck can happen to all of us, sometimes very quickly. As far as I can tell, the only thing all homeless people have in common is trauma and loss. Story 11. No, Victorian Egyptologists did not import mummies to use them as kindlings, train fuel, fertilizer. They did, however, import them to chop them up for decor and paint, and one almost blew up the Sphinx with dynamite, but the Egyptian government caught wind and intervened. Also, a lot of archaeological finds were thrown in the garbage for not being pretty, including the remains of the 6th pharaoh of Egypt, approximately 5,000 years old. Story 12. Hydrazine rocket fuel is incredibly toxic. Hydrazine fuel is highly toxic to humans, causing severe damage to the respiratory system, liver, kidneys, and central nervous system if inhaled or ingested, even in small amounts. Exposure can lead to symptoms like irritation of the eyes, nose, and throat, dizziness, nausea, seizures, coma, and potentially death depending on the level of exposure. Story 13. Dilution is the solution to pollution. I work in the industrial cleaning industry. You wouldn't believe the things I've seen. I've been in kill plants, chicken, beef, pork, pet food processing plants, hospitals, hotels, schools. You name it, I've been there. They all stand behind this motto. The EPA stands behind this motto. OSHA stands behind this motto. And you think recycling matters. LMFAO. Without oversight, this planet is literally being poisoned. We are being poisoned. No one in a high-value position cares. This is how some people get paid and put food on their table, by turning a blind eye. Story 14. We monitor every item in person while you're on store property and create behavioral models from the data to strategically force you to buy things you otherwise wouldn't care about. And our innovations have directly translated into national security applications for mass surveillance and defense. We also share the data gathered while you're in the store with everyone from the FBI to the NSA and CIA using third-party data brokers. We even got radar in the parking lot that detects people in stolen merchandise. Story 15. Former child actor. Quiet on the Set is probably one of the most accurate depictions of the child entertainment industry you can currently get. The industry is not built around keeping your children safe and happy. They will be exploited, whether that's through making them do Yule stunts/lines/scenarios, turning their physical appearance into the butt of a joke, or simply being unable to express discomfort about something they're asked to do. I was very lucky. No one ever abused me that way, but there are things I've done that I don't think I, as a painfully self-conscious, depressed teen, needed to do. I don't think I needed to be hired to do a is the main character gay bit because I am androgynous. I don't think I needed to have my cleavage accentuated at 15 years old. It absolutely affected the way I viewed myself and damaged my self-esteem permanently. I weighed about 100 pounds and had a goal weight of 85. I was not allowed to be the fat kid. Story 16. I work in a state mental health care hospital. We have many patients with violent history, even some that are incarcerated, but placed in the hospital for competency evaluation or as a judgment penalty. They tell many stories to new employees in orientation. One is told to emphasize the importance of observing and protecting patients in temporary restraint. Many years ago, before they had the rule of continuous one observation on restrained patients, a man was placed in a restraint chair and left alone for several minutes in a hallway. Another patient came up and decided to pull the restrained man's eyes out. I can't imagine being in that poor man's position. We have to sit in the restraint chair and be strapped down during training so we see how it feels to be unable to move, and to emphasize the importance of fixing the straps so the patient can't harm themselves or anyone else, but also not so tight that they lose their breath or regular blood flow. When my turn came, I kept thinking about the terror that man must have felt. Unable to move, unable to escape or fight back. The only chance of help is to call for staff that you also don't trust because they just put you in this position. It's so ed. Story 17. A large amount of what we know about mental health is based on fabricated data. Edit. Examples would include obvious studies such as power posing and the Stanford prison experiment. Both use cherry-picked falsified data. Other things that typically come up is how for many graduate students and PhDs, your career is based on your ability to publish. Replications don't often get published, and so there is intense pressure from universities to constantly be finding something new. As a result, many in the academic community will alter stats or blatantly create data in order to maintain their careers. Universities don't look closely at said data because they have a vested interest in you publishing. Journals have little to no true oversight, and your ability to publish determines your future. Studies that do have good data only truly apply to white men. For example, everything we know about ADHD is associated with male behavior, even though women often present differently. Yes, they can present the same, but there are specific behaviors more common in women. This trend continues across all of the DSM. Oh, even the DSM is almost entirely for insurance purposes and very good for diagnosis. Many therapists use criteria found in the ICD, which is also based on the healthcare system, although somewhat less so. Story 18. A bridge was built in southern Nevada about 15 years ago at the cost of $150 million. Despite all the fail checks and safety checks and layers of professional engineers, a potentially catastrophic failure was found by the junior engineer as he walked the bridge for a final check before it was opened for traffic in a huge public rollout. Expansion joints are absolutely crucial to any bridge. Simply put, they allow sections of the bridge to move slightly to account for wind and temperature fluctuations. As the engineer walked the bridge, something seemed off. He walked the bridge a second, then a third time. The bridge was designed and constructed with no expansion joints. By the time the faulty bridge was brought down and a new bridge was designed and constructed, the final cost was above $400 million. Not a word was released to the public. Story 19. I'm a web developer and work for a large hosting company, constantly seeing WordPress-powered sites exploited because of various plugins or pirated themes, exploited to distribute CP. Sure, you know that CP is bad, but when you actually see it, you realize how bad it is on another level. Story 20. As a nurse, it's unsettling how many patients I've seen who come in for routine procedures and end up with life-altering complications. It's often a result of rushed care or overlooked details. People assume hospitals are infallible, but the reality is that even in the best facilities, human error can lead to devastating outcomes. Always advocate for your health and never hesitate to ask questions. Story 21. Stepping barefoot in a puddle of hydrofluoric acid or exposing that much skin to the stuff in general is absolutely lethal, and no one would really be able to know what happened to you, nor would you even think much about it at the time if you weren't aware of what it was. HF is technically a weak acid, think vinegar, so it's not going to burn you like hydrochloric or sulfuric acid would. However, you'll start developing vague flu-like symptoms and stop breathing in around 3 days unless you treat the exposure immediately. Calcium gluconate gel is the gold standard. The extremely simplified explanation is that is just draws enough calcium away from the stuff that keeps you alive, and unless you neutralize it with a big whopping dose of the stuff locally, you're pretty much doomed. While its use is fairly specialized, it's not nearly as controlled as one would expect, given just how dangerous it is. Story 22. That foreign IT contractors, mainly from India, working in the healthcare industry, likely share their passwords and/or computer screens with unvetted friends who view confidential patient information. I believe this is true because I could often hear them talking to each other while on the phone with me. I'd help a contractor with something like logging in, but there would be a whole room full of guys on the other end of the phone, and not across the room, like literally sitting next to the contractor talking to him. I suspect maybe they were sharing the workload. One guy's salary split between multiple people can still be a lot of money over there. Story 23. All these people working administrative jobs that depend on computers, 90% of them don't really know of to properly use them, nor do they really know how to use the basic softwares like Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. Maybe not very scary, but incredibly frustrating and depressing for me, especially each time I'm called by a colleague to solve the easily fixable problem they have, and I'm not from the IT department. 2 hours ago, it was because a colleague didn't know how to turn off the formatting marks in Word. Story 24. Outside of incredibly high-end manufacturing and shipping, the entire infrastructure, logistics, and manufacturing process in the United States and the world is held together by duct tape and a prayer. Sure, we have gotten a lot better about a lot of things, using good manufacturing practices and such, but most people are winging it as they go. And we only continue to function not because of processes, but because people decide to make it work anyway. Story 25. Most college professors have absolutely no training in education. Nada, zilch. And the more famous ones, think Ivy League, most states' flagship universities, don't give a damn about undergraduate education. They only care about faculty scholarship and/or their sports teams. You want a good learning experience in higher ed? Go to a regional undergraduate college where faculty are expected to be good * teachers *. Want more higher ed? Go to one of those research factories that don't give a damn about undergraduate education. You'll be getting the best of both worlds. Story 26. If antibiotic misuse and overuse continues, we're going to have lots of deaths from previously treatable bacterial infections and diseases. A lot more drug-resistant infections are popping up and hardly any no antibiotics work on it. Lots in elderly and in general. Most patients are contact precautions, isolation gown, mask, gloves in hospital, to not spread to other patients at risk. Lots of it is hospital-acquired too, so it's a vicious cycle of transmission. It also takes multiple years to develop new antibiotics, and these things are becoming resistant faster than we can keep up. We're looking at, in a worst-case scenario if this continues, a world where an infected cut can kill you because nothing can treat it. Story 27. We know when you're peeing in the pool. Also, when someone poops in the pool, they just make everyone get out for 25 minutes, as hypothetically all water hits filtration in that time. Hypothetically. We also shock the water with additional chlorine. There are many ways the team decides who gets to fish the log out of the pool. Last year it was Rochambeau. Story 28. How underregulated mental health treatment is, especially therapists in private or group practices. You could claim that wiping mud on clients' foreheads cures depression, and as long as you have paying clients who believe you, you can keep it up for years. What's worse is other therapists will ignore the nonsense because of respecting beliefs. The few people who do get in trouble by licensing agencies can simply change their title to life coach and charge even more. Story 29. If you have a hoarse voice for an unknown reason, it could be due to warts growing on your vocal cords. If not treated, they could eventually choke off your airway. That's why all voice referrals have to have a medical eval before we try therapy. Story 30. Lifeguard! I cannot explain to you how quiet and how fast drowning is. Even people with some idea tend to think, okay, so barely any noise. No, there's nothing. You might get some splashing right at the beginning if someone's just panicking, but I've seen an adult man get into trouble with absolutely no sound. Even if someone can get their mouth out of the water, they're so locked in on breathing and not dying that they won't yell. Their arms and legs are under the water, and they're struggling so hard that nothing can make it to the surface to splash. You won't hear it. Please, please, please do not take your eyes off your kids in water, even the bath, for even a second. That's all it takes. In my career, I've seen drowning, but I have been fortunate enough to not see drowned. Would love for it to stay that way. Story 31. The requirements to become a flight instructor are shockingly low when it comes to flight experience. You only need 100 hours of pilot and command time to get your commercial certificate. There are a lot of other things involved in the process, so it's not like the FAA is just certifying instructors without vetting and training, but the lack of experience required has always bothered me. Story 32. I'm a teacher, and all I can say is that you should teach your kids. Teach them since early age. Teach them at home. Drop your phone and teach your kids. Trust me, no one else will. As for us teachers, we are too busy implementing useless strategies to pass inspections and keep the admins happy. Story 33. Single-family home renting is absolutely destroying the housing market. Not only are their prices way too high, but many companies will actually buy up several homes in an area and not do anything with them for almost a year so that they can choke out an area, fix the price, and then bring in a rush. Couple that with the fact that, for the sheer profits they make, there is no excuse for shoddy refurbishing and lack of continued maintenance. Couldn't be in that industry anymore. Story 34. I stop hundreds of cars a year from running over children and adults as a crossing guard. I'm only there 2 hours a day, 5 days a week during the school year. It's insane how dangerous it is for kids to walk to school. Edit. If anyone sees this, please remember that your local crossing guard stands there 10 hours a week. They know which kids are safe and which kids will run out without looking. If we're making you wait longer, there's probably a very good reason, like a kid on a bike is coming that you can't see. Please, we aren't there to inconvenience you. Do you think your local town wants to spend like 8-10K per guard per year at each crossing? Story 35. I work in hospitality, and the scariest thing is how unqualified everyone is. When I stay at a hotel, I like to think I'm safe and secure with staff who will look out for me. In reality, the staff are working at a hotel because they dropped out of school at 16 and have no idea what they are doing. During our last fire training, whilst trying to express how important it is to get the evacuation right, a group commented that they didn't care what happened to the guests because if the building burns down, their job will be gone anyway. Story 36. I worked at a very large and prestigious oceanography institute studying climate science and climate change. And yay, we're ed big time. Fisheries collapsing, microplastics in everything everywhere, ocean rising and acidification, storms getting gnarlier, mass extinction. The list goes on and on. Many of peers were childless and I think low to high-grade depressed because we were watching our planet die on macro and micro levels. Of course, there were many optimistic aspects of research and fun projects, but overall, we knew we just rearranging chairs on the Titanic. Story 37. The legal profession developed a foolproof method of contracting out of criminal liability. Some people in the profession don't know/believe it, but others use it a lot and don't want anyone to stop it. It's profitable for them. And anyway, the clients that want them to keep doing it wouldn't tolerate their backing out. Story 38. I used to live in an island called Kinmen, just right off the coast of China, technically a part of Taiwan. There used to be mine everywhere. And I mean everywhere. Officially, it's been demined. But locals know that there's still about 20% of mines that's still out in the wild. There was an incident that a cow stepped on an anti-tank mine. Half of the island heard it, but the cow wasn't accounted for. Story 39. I work in homelessness. There's lots of scary stuff about this work that people are probably aware of or are intentionally ignorant of. But one of the most scary, shocking things I learned in this work was pretty early on in it. There are lots and lots of reasons that people experiencing homelessness may be dirty or not shower frequently, but I have had it reported to me multiple times that a female client is refusing to shower practice hygiene because being dirty/unclean/stinky prevents men from raping her when she's sleeping outside. Both very scary and very sad. Story 40. That AI is going to replace you in work, but it won't free us from labor. We will just have a lucky few AI stewards, and the rest will do the manual tasks we need done. It's not sci-fi or political fear-mongering. Don't worry, I'm trying my best to make it less devastating to the workforce every day. Story 41 software developer here. Maybe it's not like this everywhere, but at my company, when projects are behind schedule, they start cutting features to release it on time. It's almost always security concerning items. This is why I don't do any banking on my phone. Story 42. A huge number of clinics are owned by venture capital organizations and are disguised to appear as if they're owned by the doctor. These clinics regularly perform unnecessary and substandard treatment on patients. It is pure evil. Glorified secretaries run the clinic under direction from their corporate masters and regularly override the decisions of actual doctors. Any attempt by regulatory agencies to address this problem has resulted in defamation lawsuits targeted at individuals within the regulatory organizations. It worked. No further attempts are being made. In fact, regulatory organizations are now accepting funds from the corporate organizations. Patients are blind to the corruption. Fortunately, some doctors are able to retain integrity, but they're few and far between. It's a minefield. Story 43. In the field of cybersecurity, there's a known fact that might not be common knowledge in the general public. Many of the devices in our daily lives, like smart TVs, baby monitors, and even fridges, can be hacked. These devices often run on outdated software with known vulnerabilities, turning them into potential entry points for cyber attackers to access your home network, spy on you, or disrupt your life in ways you might not immediately notice. Story 44. There's a massive crisis brewing in American primary care, and everything we're doing seems to be in service of accelerating that crisis into a full-blown catastrophe. Primary care physicians are a critical part of the healthcare system. They're the front line. They direct care and help to make sure patients end up in the right place at the right time. They also provide vaccinations that are very necessary to keeping public health from falling into absolute hell. But over the past 10 years, a number of capitalist forces have combined to make primary care more profitable. As with any other industry, this is done by making the service cheaper and, well, eventually much more. Primary care docs now overwhelmingly work in a healthcare system rather than a private practice. Those systems require heavy patient loads and rapid turnover, double booking every slot every day. And on the other side, health insurance companies are getting more and more unbearable. Primary care bears the brunt of this. A significant amount of time you'll spend as a primary care provider will be in dealing with insurance bullshit that will frustrate you and your efforts to provide decent care to your patients. This is resulting in some major shifts in primary care. First, fewer people are going into it. Doctors who retire from primary care are not being replaced. Their patient loads are just getting dumped into the local healthcare economy. Doctors who aren't able to retire, well, it's hard to switch specialties in the middle of a career. I say that as a physician who did it, against pretty much everyone's advice. Some are leaving medicine altogether, and some are switching up their care model to something called concierge medicine. These physicians basically purge their patient roles of anyone who isn't independently wealthy. They charge a retainer of thousands of dollars per year, and they keep a relatively small roster of patients to whom they are much more openly available. These people get the best care the physician can offer. They're seen on time, they get plenty of time with the physician during an appointment. If they have a question in the middle of the night, they can page their doctor. It's a great service, but of course it's only available to people with a lot of extra cash. When they switch to this model, they dump a massive amount of patients into the local healthcare economy. This increases the burden on the other physicians, and it's starting to create a vicious cycle. It's getting harder and harder to find a physician who is even accepting new patients, and when you do, expect to wait months for an initial appointment. Then you have to hope they don't bail for greener pastures. This is a well-known problem in healthcare, but it really feels like we're doing absolutely nothing to fix it, while we do more and more bullshit to make it worse. I really do worry for my own kids' future in this regard. Story 45. I work in cybersecurity. The amount of people who go to porn on their company computers is way too high. Plus the S who think they're skirting the system by trying to VPN from a VPN or attempt to bypass protocols set up by the company. Plus having to deal with CP more than once a year is too damn high. Story 46. I work in finance, and it's horrifying how underprepared your average non-boomer American is for retirement. As costs for the big essentials, education, housing, healthcare, have skyrocketed over the past few decades, wages have obviously not kept pace. Your average earning American, as a result, has been able to save less and less. 20 years from now, we will see a lot of Americans going into retirement with minimal savings, still in debt, and being forced to manage largely off of Social Security. It's not going to be pretty. Story 47. I used to work for a well-known coffee chain. We once had a rat in our store for a month, and it would eat some of the food we left out to thaw overnight. We'd find rat droppings on our pastry sheets, and once a barista working an opening shift grabbed a container of bagels to set up for the morning, and the rat jumped out at them. Our manager never put any kind of sanitation methods into place or closed the store, so we were serving food that had been near rat poop. Granted, our food was wrapped in plastic, but it still makes me gag every time I think about it. Story 48. Self-driving cars are a scam. LiDAR plus cameras are required, but a certain egomaniac billionaire thinks he knows best and is cynical of LiDAR support. China is eating our lunch, and with the lowering of self-driving regulations in the USA, should send a signal to consumers that they can't achieve what they're selling. On top of that, 98% of gallium and antimony used in semiconductors come from China, which just banned those exports yesterday. Story 49. There is not much that is terrifying in the world of mortgage lending, other than the finality of wire fraud. You are getting ready for closing, communicating with the closing agent daily. They send you their account numbers for your wire, and you send a huge wire transfer of all of your savings to make the biggest purchase of your life. Then the next day, the title agent asks when you're going to send that wire. It never arrived, and they have never seen the account numbers that you used. That money is gone. No one can recover it. No one is on the hook. It has been entirely stolen from the buyer. Story 50. Little late to the party, but I do electrical safety work for power systems in large factories, and those things can be nightmare fuel. Everyone knows about electric shock. You touch something that is live and the electricity passes through your body. It can cause you to lock up, grip, and be unable to let go, or even kill outright. Fewer people know about electric arc flash. Instead of the electricity going through you, it can go through the air to reach another conductor. Doing this creates an immense amount of heat that essentially causes a small explosion. Small arc flashes are scary but survivable with the right PPE, arc-rated, not just fire-resistant. Large arc flashes are only survivable in arc flash suits that are just bomb suits. People outside of electrical work probably aren't familiar with arc flash suits, but electricians can tell you they're no joke. And they shouldn't be, because that level of heat turns you from biology into physics very quickly. Story 51. As an attorney, most of us were never really trained to be lawyers. Yes, we were given instructions on the law in our classes, and we had to take the bar for our state, but we were never taught how to practice law. Doctors, electricians, plumbers, dentists, etc. have to intern or apprentice with someone to get certified. We are given a diploma and a certificate after passing and sent on our way. If we screw up, we could lose our license. Story 52. Most people think that by buying a new car that it will be perfect. I worked in a Toyota Lexus plant in assembly, which is the final processes for building a car. We had two processes there, cart and paint hospital. When the car came off the inspection line, anything mechanically wrong with it could be repaired by cart. Any paint defects could be repaired by paint hospital. The repairs were as good as original, but there are a lot of cars out there that have already been worked on before they ever left the plant. Story 53, robocalls make money for the telecom carriers and local telecom provider and some cell providers, and they have no intention or will to stop them. The industry term is carrier access billing. On the internet side, think of it as blocking pop-ups on your device, but the pop-ups don't get blocked. Story 54, we are cutting huge corners on your house. It's practically thrown together with mistakes hidden or outright ignored. There's probably a few piss bottles hidden in the spaces under your kitchen counter. Our guys simply don't get paid enough to care. Most of them have kids and working hundreds of miles away from home and probably are going through divorce or huge family problems. And if you're the type of person who visits the site a lot to make sure the work is done right, we aren't going to do business with you. Story 55. Above 90% of restaurants, from chain to local to even fine dining, use oils that are equivalent to liquid plastic. I'm not sure if this is just a USA thing or not. I'd guess Europe would have more strict standards, but I think some of the health problems, weight issues, and even mental health may very well be a consequence of very poor oils that food is cooked in. Story 56. I work in medical insurance. Most people don't understand that insurance through an employer is not your insurance. It's the employer's, and you pay them to let you use it. In addition, everything about the plan is customizable by the employer, so your plan doesn't cover something, then that's because your employer decided not to cover it. Your employer can decide if and when things need pre-authorization. There are employers that don't have that. Also, most teacher plans are above average in coverage, and there are some school districts that have plan coverage in the top 1% of things like deductible and co-pays and so on. Those teachers still bitch like crazy. Story 57. I don't have a number, but the amount of men who photograph women and underage girls for their own personal collections under the guise of professional photographers is staggering. And the amount of parents who subject their young children to these men, pressuring them into modeling, is even worse. Story 58. I work in social media management. We have access to so much information about you and are able to create targeted ads based off of it. If you have a Facebook or Instagram account, the information you're giving us access to is astonishing. If we want to target an audience set that has an iPhone, made 5 phone calls today, has downloaded the McDonald's app, has messaged their friend about Taylor Swift in the last week, unfollowed their uncle 2 years ago and took a picture of their dog today, we can find those people easily. Story 59. The people at the top did not get there by merit, and almost all of them are morons. Most of the people at the top of major corporations have no idea how their own business works, have never left the top floor of their towers, have never met a frontline worker. They were born rich, got mommy and daddy to pay for their MBA, and they entered the workforce on the 50th floor as regional directors in daddy's company. Hell, getting a CEO to sign a piece of paper is like pulling teeth, let alone getting them to show up at any given place for more than 20 minutes. And it's not because they're busy. It's because they don't work. They're rent seekers. They're on permanent vacation while spending every public moment role-playing being busy while never actually contributing value, whose most significant output is doing interviews on business networks, talking about how busy they are to try and pump the stock price. For the people actually running the business, the executives are like intrusive landlords whose whims have to be managed and mitigated. Executive help is a common euphemism for moron in charge showed up for the first time in 6 months and derailed the whole project with a dipshit idea nobody could say no to. They don't even buy their own groceries. They are completely detached from the human experience. They have no idea what it is to experience hunger or cold. They have never felt pain. They do not share with us the basic drives and motives that make us human beings. They are machines built on extraction and incompetence. Never, never, never assume the person in charge is smart. They usually aren't. To be fair, they aren't supposed to be. A leader is never the smartest person in the room. A leader is the person who brings the smartest people to the room. But we've lost that definition of leadership a long time ago. And now the people at the top are human hand grenades that could go off at a moment's notice if not handled delicately, whether it's because they're stupid or just because they're insecure and combative about being stupid. Story 60. Unless you work in an operating room regularly, there is no such thing as informed consent. We told you some of the common things that can go wrong, went over the risks. We might go over surgical procedure if you ask, but you don't actually need to know exactly what we're going to do to you in there. No one needs to know that sometimes after you go to sleep, your legs go into stirrups, and we have a serious discussion on how to best clean your cervix and/or butthole, how we roll and move and tie you down. You don't need to know that I have a whole separate table set up because you're probably going to poop on someone. We have important, serious discussions about your weight and lifestyle that you don't need to know about. You don't need to be that informed. That's our job. If most people without the background education knew what surgery actually entailed and looked like, they wouldn't do it, and then we couldn't save them. Story 61. Audio engineer here. It's truly terrifying how many hours it takes to edit a vocal or instrumental performance into something passable for so many artists. Absolutely horrifying. The good news is that there are some incredible musicians who don't require editing. I think it's the difference between people who want to be famous and those who deserve to be. Story 62. Healthcare in the U.S. We simply do not have enough doctors. Period. The problem gets to the point of being just tragic the further you get from major metropolitan areas. I could go into the why, how of it, and even get into specialty issues and competency issues, but that doesn't change the fact of it. We simply do not have near enough. And because of how the general business model is set up around providing healthcare, I only foresee the problem getting much, much worse and what's being done about it expediting things. For reference, I'm sitting on 15 plus years of business modeling and reading the tea leaves in healthcare within major hospital systems, right hand of a C-level or VP. This is a known fact that seems to just be perpetually considered tomorrow's problem. That's not even getting into nurses, APPs, and improper medical resident utilization. Shit is scary and getting worse. Story 63. Tree planting isn't good in a large scale. The industrial planting of monoculture trees is bad for the environment. We also use a lot of gas and jet fuel to get the trees and people into the areas that are being replanted. Also, the amount of spilt gas and oil that goes unreported in logging practices. I've seen a lot of sludge out there that no one reports because it's expensive to reach, so the government ain't eager to investigate. Story 64, I basically disarticulate arms and legs and remove tendons, then prepare them and other bone products for surgery, etc. A lot of the tissue waste just goes in the sink. We're talking hundreds of pounds a day. All that just gets filtered back into our drinking water. I think for the most part, people know that disgusting things get filtered, but they don't necessarily think there's so much human that gets filtered out. Story 65, education. I have a relative who is an expert in education and says, obviously there are exceptions, that the reason someone is a junior high teacher is their administrators think they're not good enough to be an elementary or high school teacher. And that the whole point of junior high is to basically warehouse kids between elementary and high school because they're at a stage they can't learn. And that many college professors at smaller schools who don't have tenure are so afraid of rate my professor that they'll give you a B no matter how bad the work is. If kids don't take their class, they're out. Story 66. I used to work for a big Belgian bank, specifically a division where people's stocks were managed. When they were selling one of their head office buildings, the server rooms needed to be moved. There were daily meetings trying to find out which machine did what. At the end, there were a handful of servers left running until the very last moment, just because they had no clue what they were for and what the impact of a shutdown would be. Story 67. Used to work in quality for a food manufacturer that made ingredients which go into Subway, Taco Bell, Panera, Costco, H-E-B, Kroger, and a variety of other companies' goods. People will promise shelf life extensions and give them for preservative-free products without proof. That Danish from a Chicago bakery, the filling might be 3 months past its use date. Some workers will just not care about bugs and brush them aside. And a lot of workers aren't too hung up over the fact they're working with stuff that ends up in the food they and their families eat. While obvious bug infestations will cause product to be destroyed and will have customers asking for compensation, there's no promise that everything is completely bug-free. Part of this is because any facility with organic grains as an ingredient will have major issues. There was a new policy regarding pallets with mice droppings. It was to remove the ones with visible mouse damage and leave the rest be. If there was any microbial contamination from those mouse droppings, they got on the rest of the bags of cake mix. Story 68, car dealerships. There is at least one drug dealer in there, and yes, they'll gouge you on prices, even old ladies if they don't have morals. 5% of the entire IT staff does most of the work. Forming relationships becomes more important because that's how you have a job. Completely goes away from purpose, even in large institutions. Food service, we all know. Banking. Someone needs to write a book or something about how to connect to elderly, about how they are giving away all their money. As a child, in my experience, the parents don't want to hear it. I could be a bad salesman. Military. Why do so many of them get so quiet afterwards? Story 69. As someone in IT, a lot of businesses that process payments and handle your data are just as much of a cluster as your local McDonald's run by teenagers. Card info, PII, all of it a jumbled mess. Big chains and big companies like hospitals usually have their stuff more together, but still not up to code. We've even been told that whistleblowing is a thing, and we could get paid like a lot if we openly talked about all we knew and get a lot of companies shut down. It's no wonder that every American's SSN got leaked and lost. Everything is a balancing act of finger pointing, and nobody wants to pay to do it right. Just HIPAA alone is a nightmare, and if all you get for being reported is a slap on the wrist, why would any company pay X2, X5, X10 what their bottom line already is just to be in compliance? No one else is doing it, so why bother? And yes, I hate this fact, but it's still there regardless. Story 70. I work for a wealthy charity that has large investment funds accounting for nearly 90% of its carbon emissions. It has no plan to address this, and will just wait for those funds to reduce their emissions. I wonder how widespread this is. I think charities should be more open so that donors and other stakeholders are aware and charities can't greenwash. Story 71. I got 2 good facts as an architect teacher in a university in Mexico. 1. I was paid $4.5 USDs for 1 hour of class to around 25 student, lesser possible student room. So they were paying tops 0.20 cents for each student in university level. The minimum pay rate for one private class to one kid of elementary school starts at 5 DLs. They were making 500% in their worst number of students to the cheapest private elementary school. BTW, I'm an architect, and I got 2 masters. 2. In my second year, I wanted to fail around 40% of the class. Then I was told I was only able to fail 20% of the classroom, so I decided to never fail another student on my classes. And I told them about that policy of the school, so I told them that I wouldn't fail anyone, but that the real world would be so kind. If they wanted to learn there, it was cheap compared to real fail situations. Story 72. I work in education, and I believe that the vast majority of middle and high school students are way further behind due to COVID than everyone thinks. I have juniors and seniors who are basically unemployable at their current level of education due to lack of maturity and also just because they're super behind academically. It sucks because there's really nothing that can fix this. Story 73. Car manufacturers know exactly where you live, work, and where your GFS, BFS live. Cars have GPS and their own cell connection. People who have periods need to be aware that, in an age of surveillance, car data can definitely be used to figure out if you are pregnant and are getting an abortion. Don't be paranoid, but do things like park a block away, take a Lyft or taxi to the abortion clinic, etc. Spread the data across lots of systems to make the correlation harder for Gilead law enforcement. Story 74. Social worker that works a program meant to assist families with caring for disabled and intellectually delayed folks. At any given time, we're on the brink of millions of people with Down syndrome, autism, lower functioning folks who need 24/7 care, and others whose families are stretched to the brink and can barely get by day-to-day emotionally, mentally, and financially, even with help.